What do you make of the opposition's super for a first owner deposit policy?
Look, honestly, this is one of those policies which looks good on the surface, but when you think about it for just a minute, you realise this is terrible policy that will hurt the people it is aimed to help. Think about this scenario, Andrew. You've got an auction in Sydney or Melbourne or Perth. Two young couples turn up to the auction hoping to buy their first home. Both of them, under the Liberal policy, have withdrawn up to $50,000 of their superannuation. What's the consequence of that? Who's the winner out of that auction? Well, I'll tell you, it's neither of the new home buyers. The only person who wins in that scenario is the vendor, because those couples who turn up to that auction to buy their first home will end up bidding against each other. The price will go up, they'll have to pay more debt, and guess what? They will have also trashed their retirement savings on the way through. So this is not a panacea for first home buyers. This is a nightmare for first home buyers, and the Liberals should withdraw this policy because it is a really bad piece of policy.
All right, well, what is the answer though? Because surely in your electorate you're hearing from people who are suffering from higher rents while they're trying to buy a home, and because of what's happened in the last 5 years, can't get in the market. Is there an answer, or are things in places, prices in places like Sydney, like a runaway train? It's too late for young people.
Well, it's true that we're in a full-blown housing crisis. In my electorate of Parramatta, house prices have gone up by 12% over the last 12 months. Rents have gone up even more, 23% over the last 12 months. And that's why the government has announced $32 billion in new housing initiatives since we came to government. $32 billion to increase supply and get more people into homes. Now compare that with the opposition leader who had his big chance in his budget reply, and he did not announce a single new dollar for housing supply. And that's a pretty extraordinary position for the Liberal Party to take at a time when everybody says that the problem is housing supply.
Yeah, okay, so you just called it a full-blown housing crisis. Do you accept that the immigration that's occurred has contributed to that?
Absolutely. There's no question that high levels of immigration put pressure on housing prices.
But the government's allowed that.
No, that is a consequence of the bounce back through COVID, and that's why the government has a plan to reduce immigration levels by a half between last year and next year.
All right, supply's really a state government responsibility, but has it got to the point where the federal government has to make a big contribution with supply because the situation's that bad?
Absolutely it has. Absolutely it has. And that's why you've seen the Albanese Labor government working with our partners in the states, delivering some of the biggest housing policies this country has ever seen, $32 billion of new measures to get supply moving, to build more houses, to put downward pressure on house prices and get more people into homes.
All right, Peter Dutton, you just mentioned this. He's described the Future Made in Australia legislation as giving billions to billionaires. Do Twiggy Forrest and Gina Rinehart and these sort of people need this money for their companies to progress these projects? Can you explain why this is necessary, these tax credits, etc.?
I think this is necessary because budgets, Andrew, budgets have to be about more than dividing up the wealth today. They have to be about creating the wealth for the future. And Australia needs to be thinking about what are our industries of the future? What are the jobs that the next generation are going to get? And for example, the world is in the middle of a massive battery boom, and Australia has half of the world's lithium. Surely we back ourselves to get our share of that boom? Australia has some of the world's biggest solar resources and lots of neighbours in Asia who import energy. Surely we back ourselves to create an export industry, and that's what Future Made in Australia is all about.
And that's fair enough, but can you see how it would grate with voters to see, these billionaires get the money? That's what Peter Dutton's playing on there. So why is it necessary for them to be propped up if these are industries which are going to work going forward?
Because we've been talking about these industries for decades. We've been talking about critical minerals, we've been talking about green hydrogen, and you know what? We haven't catalysed those industries to grow and create the jobs of the future. In fact, Australia has gone backwards on Harvard's Index of Economic Complexity. We now sit at 93 out of 133 nations. And finally, we have a government who's going to back Australia to be successful in those industries of the future that we've been talking about for decades, but never gotten off the ground in a substantial way.
So Peter Dutton is keen to push ahead with nuclear energy. He said in his budget reply, young people support its introduction, and so does the majority of the world's developed countries. So what's your view on that?
Well, if people are so supportive of nuclear energy, why didn't he have the guts to outline that policy in detail in his budget reply? He said he was going to do it. We were all sitting there waiting with bated breath, and he had no information on costs and no information on locations. I think the people who don't like nuclear energy are actually sitting in Peter Dutton's party room holding him back on this policy.
Just finally, I'll mention the issue of Fatima payment. She got herself into trouble, I guess you could call it, during the week because of the saying from the river to the sea. And we saw some division at that Victorian Labor conference and those protests. One of your friends in the parliament is Josh Burns, a Jewish MP, and there's a large Middle Eastern community in your electorate. So what's your take on how the government has handled this issue generally and the Fatima payment situation?
Look, I think the government has been incredibly clear and consistent on this issue from day one. From day one, we've been calling for international law to be upheld. From day one, we've been calling for civilians to be protected. From day one, we've been calling for humanitarian aid to help those in need. At each stage of this conflict, Australia has been clear and principled and consistent, and that's why I'm proud of the policy that Labor's put forward.
And Fatima Payman, do you have some sympathy for her situation, or did she go too far? What's your view? I know, it's not really your role, you're not the leader of the party to say, but what was your personal reaction to all that?
Look, my personal reaction is that Fatima Payman is a terrific colleague, and she is, as you said, under a lot of pressure. I have enormous confidence in Fatima Payman. I think she's a terrific MP, and I absolutely acknowledge her perspective on this issue, but it's not the same as mine.
Andrew Charlton, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Andrew.